Hello, my name is Jorge Hernandez,
Hello, I'm Jessica Mendoza.
and this is the community-based learning project of COVID-19 and documenting the global pandemic. In this interview, I will be interviewed by Jessica as she will deliver the responses that I will answer regarding my experience during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Describe your initial feelings and reaction when you became aware of COVID-19. Also, describe your thought process when fully understood the severity of COVID-19.
2019 was the last major year that normalcy was present across the globe before COVID-19 began. When the first major news reports and television and articles were announcing the first major outbreak of the COVID-19 virus in China, I wasn't quite worried at the beginning and thought about it that this situation was quite a small fraction of a problem that could be easily contained and isolated as quickly as possible before the virus was about to jump from country to country across the globe. Although COVID-19 was discussed within the media as it was beginning to form, it wasn't portrayed as a serious problem and initially downplayed the severity of this growing situation at hand. Sometimes, if a major event with such impact and importance was happening, a conversation within the media by different people would be happening. If it feels interesting or if the hype is being driven to get more people to discuss about it. For the case of COVID-19, people were unknown to it and didn't feel driven to talk about it because it didn't seem interesting back in 2019. And often, in addition to lessen the seriousness of the situation, individuals would romanticize this event happening in an unrealistic fashion or just mainly focus on other events happening at the time. In describing my thought process, the moment I started to fully understand the severity of COVID-19 would be when the first major cases began to come into light in the United States, leading up to the eventual national outbreak of the virus across every state in the country until the situation became a global pandemic around the world. By that point, I started to feel some worry as new health guidelines and rules were now in place, such as sanitation and the use of masks in public areas, such as schools, parks, restaurants, stores, etc. Even if everything started to get serious, the first few months were still voluntary to stay safe and maintain our awareness against the virus. However, once the city governments, then the state governments, and finally the federal government began to release official statements and recommendations to contain the spread of the virus, this was no longer a joke anymore. And that point, it was now mandatory by these rules. By that point, the 6 feet distant rule, mandatory mask wear, official lockdowns, cancellation of social and public events slash gatherings, the sudden urge surges of deaths and infections by the virus, and the lack of government control or leadership to prevent the virus from getting more worse, it was practically signaled that the pandemic was going to be a very long, brutal, and vicious time.
Describe your experience when remote learning. What effect did the social isolation have on your mental and physical health?
To describe my experiences with remote learning from the course of my final years of high school towards entering through college, it was quite a unique but difficult and defining moment of my education that changed of how I learned forever, along with countless students across the world that had to learn and study in a whole new environment as traditional way of learning was practically non-existent once the global pandemic shut down everything including public and private education. Technology in the modern era wasn't new to schools, as by that point, students and teachers were at least familiar with these resources in our studies and the way of learning in a much practical and accommodating fashion. However, school districts across the United States and educational institutions from here in the nation and across the globe still practice traditional education as the primary focus of our way of learning, while technology was only viewed as an enhancement of that experience. Unfortunately, that ultimately became a major weakness that the global pandemic exploited to such a degree that threw the whole idea of traditional education out the window. In addition, the technology gap was too deep and too wide upon different groups and backgrounds as minorities, especially people of color and low income communities, were drastically impacted severely by the sudden change of learning into technology due to the lack of resources or accommodations to provide digital experience. This problem only worsened as the length of the global pandemic grew and the shutdown of in-person learning was extended, as students were now learning within their homes, as teachers and instructors scrambled to handle the situation and keeping young people safe and in continuing our education. The problem was that the lack of flexibility and, and accommodations and the disconnect of leadership and communication of students and parents with teachers and administrators became a significant roadblock that hindered any significant progress of the time and resources to handle this crisis, which resulted in low academic performance, low satisfactory rates, decline of enrollment, increase of instructor shortages, and a lack of improvement or funding for educational institutions. The effect that the social isolation have on my mental and physical health, I was basically more independent in my education as I felt I could no longer rely on others to help me in my education. I felt that I was more alone rather than with anyone else, and that I had to learn in a more adaptable way that really started to increase as everything began to drag.
Think about the many events the world has witnessed over the past 20 months. For example, food shortages, lockdowns, BLM movement, white supremacy versus Antifa, 2020 election, January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, etc. Describe your perspective on any of these events and your feelings as you witness or experience them.
Thinking about the many events that the world has witnessed over the past 20 months, each one of those events that happened was quite an influential time of our history around the world. A specific example that I do remember of those past 20 months would be the lockdowns of our lives, because for us as humans, we crave to be outside and to do something because we have a life that we run and we have a life that we want to be driven by. To lose that opportunity and be subjected to stay at home and do nothing, it just seems draining of what we want to do. And really, we were no longer feeling um acceptable to anything anymore because nothing was happening that felt rewarding, exciting, or beneficial to us. Another situation that also happened would be the Black Lives Matter movement, along with other protests and riots that happened at the time. To me, racism and racial discrimination has affected this country for generations and has become such a problem that people have to understand how, for us as people of color, we are fighting to change our way of life. Because in this reality, we are being harmed by it, and that needs to change.
Describe how the pandemic affected your last year of high school. Consider both academic and social development and the transition to CSUN. What does being a part of the ELP community at CSUN mean to you?
To describe the extent of how the COVID-19 pandemic affected my last year of high school when considering both academic and social development of myself as a student, towards the eventual transition to CSUN that I'm currently now enrolled in, I honestly felt that the chapter of high school had closed by that point in a much earlier fashion because really, after 4 years of preparing such a grand moment that often many high schoolers dream of, that they were going to finally enjoy a really deserved senior year full of life, fun, and ending, it was no longer being given to us. And I felt that there was nothing left to stay for. And it really started to show that reality can often change. And the reality was that high school was now over for me, both academically and socially, that I had to move on. And the reality was I was growing up. From the transition to CSUN, I felt that it gave me the chance to start over. It gave me the chance to reflect myself. It gave me the chance to see that I had a lot to learn and that I was still learning. But that was okay because it really gave me an opportunity to do something worthwhile that really felt more rewarding than I was in high school. Being part of the EOP community at CSUN really gave me a new home because the original home that I had in high school was no more. Everyone was gone. That life was over. Being in EOP felt like a home to me because I was now exposed to new friends, new instructors, new mentors, and really a new world that I was going to achieve in the next few years of my college years. So to me in EOP, it felt of a new beginning in college that I needed.
After going through this experience and knowing what you know today, what type of advice do you think you would have helped you better prepare and cope with the pandemic?
After going through the experience and knowing what I know today from everything I have seen since then, the type of advice I would give to myself, especially if I could ever talk to my past self before the COVID-19 pandemic, I would say to myself would be to press on no matter what happens and learn to adapt even in the most complicated and challenging situations that will be thrown against us each and every day throughout our lives. Life happens in so many ways, and in those ways, anything can happen that we might not be prepared for anyway, because they can happen at any time and anywhere. Even if we prepare ourselves in so many situations, we are not perfect. And eventually we will face setbacks at first, that we will struggle and fail. But that's okay because that is part of the learning to move forward and improve ourselves. Understanding that life won't be the same and ourselves will change eventually, it's okay to feel vulnerable. Whoever we were before the pandemic, that part is gone. We are a new person, and it's time to accept. It's okay that we will miss the old days before COVID-19, but we have to move forward and keep going no matter what, because life moves forward and time won't wait for us.
Highlight a specific memory from the past 20 months. Describe and tell us about it.
To highlight a specific memory from the past 20 months, I could honestly remember one specific memory that was during the very beginning of the pandemic, which was on the very day that schools across the country, specifically in my local school, was shutting down for 2 weeks, which honestly extended indefinitely that we never came back. But in that memory, I can remember on that very rainy day, our instructor from a club that I was in high school announced to all of us that he was retiring from our high school and that the program that he taught for us was no longer be available for us in the next academic year. I could remember the advice he gave was that he was retiring, that life moves forward and things might be tough, but honestly, you have to move forward as well. I could remember that he gave us the reason why he was retiring is because he needed to be with his family. And but still, he still considered us as family because of the bond of the years and everything that we shared of the class and with the instructor. So that bond will never be broken. We are family forever. So I carry on that bond when I meet people and meet a group or meet new friends because having such a strong bond, you can never break it. That is important because if you are alone, it's hard. But when you're with someone, you feel alive and you feel good.
Thank you. And that concludes all the questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time as well.